The district digitally records the audio portions of the meetings. All recordings are kept. Oh wait, should we do the
Flag salute?
flag salute and then that first? Yeah. Trustee Vidal, will you lead the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry about that. I will do the land acknowledgement. The Pacifica School District acknowledges that we gather on unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone people. As guests, we humbly extend our gratitude to the Ramaytush Ohlone elders and community. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland, and we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples. As the original stewards of this land, the Ramaytush Ohlone understand the interconnectedness of all things and the importance of maintaining harmony with nature. Likewise, Pacifica School District commits to teaching our school community how to be responsible stewards of this land. All right, and then Barbara, will you take roll call?
Yes. Trustee Vidal?
Here.
Trustee Burkini? Here. Trustee Doggett?
Here.
Trustee Patel?
Here.
Trustee Villalobos is absent.
All right. Now, the district records the audio portions of the meetings. All recordings are kept in the superintendent's office for 30 days and are available during that time period for inspection by members of the public on district equipment without charge. In-person speakers wishing to address the board on agenda items, please complete a request card with your name, address, and the item number and submit it to the board president or superintendent. You will be called to address the board. You may speak for up to 3 minutes. Virtual speakers wishing to address the board on agenda items, please submit your first and last name and the agenda item you wish to speak on in the Q&A area of the webinar. Please do not submit comments or questions in the Q&A area. You will be called to address the board. Your microphone will be unmuted and you may speak for up to 3 minutes. After you've spoken, your microphone will be muted. All right, in-person speakers.
So just for clarification, is that anyone that's virtual, their opportunity to speak is during public comment, and they can talk about one of the two topics. One is the appointment or the LCAP and budget. And then when we move toward the LCAP and budget presentation, there will be kind of natural breaking points where the members in the audience may participate in discussion around that. And so there'll be kind of breaking points that I'll explain on that end, and then there'll be opportunity at the end for board discussion. Okay? So are there any speakers on Zoom?
Not at this time.
Members of the audience, would you like to speak on either of those two topics before we move to the LCAP?
I thought there'd be an LSC public comment, so I have something I could say, so why don't I?
And it's about,
Do I go
is it
over?
about the appointment or the LCAP and work study?
Yes.
Okay, sure.
Just sort of about those two things. One of the things was just an appreciation that we continue to keep these meetings on Zoom, because I do feel that the engagement of our members is higher, and I know my engagement is easier because usually we'd be here, we'd sit through a little bit of it, and then we'd have to commute home. But I hope that moving forward we do continue to allow this sort of interaction from home, which is great. And then that we were here because we had hoped to have some interaction in the work study on the LCAP. So we're here, we've talked to some of our members about the LCAP, and if you have any clarifying questions or just want to know what general LSC members might be thinking about different items, please feel free to ask Natalie Abenante from Ocean Shore or I about anything that comes up today. Thanks.
Thanks, Megan. So no virtual. All right, so we have the procedural item, the district values, the goals provided in our local control accountability plan, the LCAP, and strategic plan. All of our district board agenda items are tied to these goals. One or more goals are listed in the description of each board agenda item. The details for each of those district goals can be accessed on our website at www.pacificasd.org. And this item is approval of hiring of administrator of special projects, LCAP Goal 1, and this is on you, Dr. Olson.
Yep. So tonight I am here to ask for your approval to, as I recommend, Principal Monica Labeo as the administrator for special projects. She is an excellent leader. She's an excellent accomplisher, finisher, project manager. And when we designed this position, it became clear that this would be a great match for Monica's skill set. As well as Monica has been the principal of Valamar School for over 9 years and has had great success. I was nervous about sharing this information with the teachers because I knew that it would, while they were genuinely very happy for Monica, for them it's a huge transition, and that just speaks to their respect and the relationships that she's developed with the staff and the parents and the students at Valamar School. So I would recommend that we appoint Monica Labeo as the administrator of special projects, and I think she's a great match for the position.
Are there any questions regarding the approval of hiring Monica as the administrator of special projects? So do I have a motion to approve hiring the administrator of special projects?
One motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Barbara, will you take the roll call vote, please?
Of course. All in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes 4-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations. I'm just going to ask a favor. Could we turn off the overhead fans? There's a switch over there and a switch over there.
Is it the center switch?
Is that display B or A?
That was a light.
Right. There we go. Perfect.
Can I get to accept that?
The fans are, I think,
No, it's cool.
Okay, I don't think the fan's connected to this one.
I think it's that third one.
Oh,
There you go.
so it's center lights.
That's it.
Okay, center lights
Okay.
too.
Perfect. All right.
All right, yay. I guess we're moving into work study.
Perfect. So let me talk about the way that I think that set up. Megan asked me yesterday morning around a way to do interaction around this. So if we think about when I first became superintendent, that the LCAP was a discussion at a big square table where we would eat pizza and talk about the LCAP. And it was very casual, and it was a good discussion. And then there was, as we were moving closer to the pandemic, not knowing that we were moving closer to the pandemic, there was a time when there was a lot of involvement in the LCAP, and there was a board meeting, work study where the board was in the center and the observers were on the outside, and it didn't accomplish any of the intended goals, which if we think about work studies, the purpose of a work study is for the board to have the conversation in public. Because we can't talk about things privately, we can't move business forward. So then we had the pandemic where everything was online, kind of limiting interaction in general. But now that we're back, let's think about how to do this. I didn't think that we could do a virtual hybrid and this and whatever. So what I think we should do is, this is a presentation that really has two parts. There's the LCAP goals and then there's the budget. So I think after the LCAP goals, there's kind of a natural stopping point where we could spend 10 minutes with input and interaction and questions, and then move on to the budget. And then that presentation will be about 10 or 15 minutes long. Another 10-ish minutes of interaction. And then probably a good 30 to 40 minutes of board discussion. And so I think we will probably be a little bit more than an hour and a half. But again, this is our first introduction to the LCAP from that standpoint of what's in it. It's nothing in here is going to be terribly shocking because it's the work that we talk about at nearly every board meeting. It's the work that you are aware that we're doing. Some of it may be some details. We did try to keep the presentation at the highest level so that it's not into the details. There are some accessory documents that will help get into the details of that, which is the overview, which includes the goals and actions, as well as kind of as the draft of the LCAP. So I will kick us off with the presentation and just say that you can be in the place where we are right now and think, oh my gosh, we have so much work to do. But if we really take a pause and think about where we are in this first full year of a full return to school, we're very well positioned to do some of this work. There's a lot of work to do, but we should be very proud of the things that are in place and the work that we're going to do. So I welcome the opportunity to share and talk about this. Our presentation tonight will have our primary LCAP writer, Mr. Will Lucy, will get us started. We have 3 goals in our LCAP. Those will be shared by our 3 cabinet members, and then following some questions and discussion on that, we will move to our budget. So, but remember, this is a work study, so it's a little less formal than our other meeting. Not knowing necessarily what to expect. I didn't know how many people were going to be here. I didn't know how to set up the room. So while it is in this form, it really was also to help facilitate the videoing of that as well. So, all right, Mr. Lucy, get us started.
All right. So our story, as it relates to the LCAP, started last year when we developed a 3-year plan, a 2021-2024 LCAP. Our first priority when developing this 3-year plan was the identification of student and staff needs. To know each student and their needs is based on this knowledge, what staff needs to know in addressing those student needs. So in addressing needs and supporting students socially, emotionally, and academically, we follow a 3-tier system of support. Tier 1 being the universal tier, and that's a support for all students. Tier 2 is the selected at-risk student support, and Tier 3 is the intensive high-risk student support. So part of the collaboration and review and analysis around data included the engagement we had with our educational partners. And these are some of the things that we learned from our educational partners through surveys and educational partner meetings. The input we received helped drive the edits and additions to the LCAP. The input that emerged included improved staff compensation, continued health support, belonging, and relationships, and the need for PD for teachers around curriculum and intervention. The LCAP goals, metrics, and actions follow a 3-step plan. First, we began and will continue to identify the impact the pandemic has had on our students and our families. Second, we expand instructional and social-emotional support for our students. And third, we have seen and will continue to see if our actions and supports are having an impact on what all students need, on what some students need, and on what individual students need. And in turn, what staff needs to know to address those student needs. There are 3 goals. These 3 goals are similar. Are the same that we've had, and they address these areas: conditions of learning, academic outcomes for students, and the emotional wellness and mental health of students. Also, the engagement with our community. So, goal 1.
I present to you this evening LCAP Goal 1, Conditions of Learning. Thanks to the hard work and diligent efforts of our employees, we have been able to support our students as they transition from distance and hybrid learning back to full-time in-person learning at the school sites. Bringing back our students full-time to a safe, nurturing environment was our top priority during the school year 2021-2022. Our employees put forth dedication and commitment to problem-solving any issues that arose during this incredibly challenging school year and focused on reconnecting with our students and families, understanding the needs of each of our students, and supporting each of the school sites in making this school year successful. Our goal of conditions of learning is an important one as it sets the stage for day-to-day instruction and provides for a safe school environment for our students. Conditions of learning include that our students benefit from a highly qualified, diverse staff, standards-based instructional materials, and safe facilities. Moving forward, some of our highlighted actions for conditions of learning include continuing to monitor recruitment and retention efforts, especially for hard-to-fill positions. Continue building positive rapport with our labor partners as we seek additional compensation for hard-to-fill positions and implement recruiting strategies that strive for diverse candidate pools. Complete the adoption process for K-5 science curriculum aligned with the next generation science standards and evaluate the effectiveness of the currently adopted 6th through 8th grade science curriculum. Provide science safety training for all teachers involved in hands-on science education. Ensure all classrooms have designated technology equipment available for staff and students. Evaluate on an annual basis PSD data systems and platforms to ensure compatibility with identified goals and needs. Provide internet connectivity for all students inside and outside of school. And a new action that we've added for school year 2022-2023 is in order for school facilities to remain clean, safe, and functional, we will identify areas of needed repair at school sites through weekly monitoring of work orders and address these repairs in a timely manner. Thank you for listening to a few of the highlighted actions for our LCAP Goal 1, Conditions of Learning.
Goal 2, student outcomes, is around the idea of making informed, data-driven decisions to address the academic need of all students through the use of assessments, strong instruction, and support and intervention plans. Actions under Goal 2 fall under these 4 general areas. Know where our students are academically, provide high-quality instruction, provide intervention for students who need additional support, and develop a robust, tiered system of support for all students. Actions include to continue monitoring, analyzing, and collaborating around assessment results, provide PD to staff and support content, instructional practices, and interventions, the support of schools with a higher number of student need, and provide ELD instruction and PD for some schools and teachers that are in most need of it. Action 3, Goal 3.
Okay, thank you. Goal 3, engagement. And as you can see, there's 2 to 3 parts of the main parts of the goal. We're working to ameliorate the social and mental health of students, promoting a positive school climate, and looking for opportunities for family engagement and input in their students' education. So in looking at some of our actions here, some of the highlights, we have essentially created and implemented this year an entire counseling system for our students. So we've been able to put together Tier 1 and Tier 2 direct counseling services for students. And this wasn't just obviously getting the personnel in place, it was looking at our referral processes, our delivery of services process, and lots of protocols, practices, getting all of those dialed in, so we're providing the best services for students. Implementation of SEL curriculum, so you've heard us talk about the Caring School Community SEL curriculum. We've been able to implement that more so this school year. There's been professional development from staff, for staff, targeted PD on the SEL curriculum. And that's really given us an opportunity to directly teach skills such as responsibility, empathy, those types of things that are really important to student social emotional development. An important component of the SEL curriculum is actually circles, opening circles, closing circles. We've talked about that in other presentations. And that dovetails with our restorative practices. And restorative practices there's a big piece of the proactive restorative practices that are in place, and this is kind of school-wide expectations, monthly themes, presentations from school counselors and classrooms, all of those kind of those proactive restorative practices that are adding to a positive school climate and fostering that positive school climate. And we know about Tier 2 restorative practices, which are more perhaps after there's been a behavioral incident or there's something between two students, and we have that really structured restorative practice. So that's definitely been an initiative moving forward. We are absolutely looking at our various survey data to get the input from our parents, staff, and students. We have our panorama data that gives us great information, and other surveys related to SEL that we have staff completed. Outreach to parents. I know personally for me, I'm working on the CPAC, for example, Special Education Parent Advisory Committee, and really working to get a one parent rep from every school involved in CPAC. And I know that those efforts are also taking place at the school sites on DLAC, ELAC, school site council on recruiting parents for involvement in those. We know that parent involvement in students' education does contribute to the positive, education for students. To have their families involved is definitely good for their social emotional well-being. And then attendance. So really working on attendance this year has been, definitely an interesting year with attendance, because we've had COVID-related pieces, obviously, but what we really want to do moving forward is to look at what are the barriers of attendance for students. What are the nuts and bolts barriers for students and families? Like, what kinds of things are there? And then what are some other pieces that may need to be worked on as far as student engagement? What can we do to have students be excited about being at school, not waking up and saying, I don't want to go to school, but I do want to go to school. So really taking a look at what our data is telling us about how we can strengthen that engagement and improve chronic absenteeism.
I think we want to stop there, right?
Yeah.
Before we
So
get to budget.
before we go on, let's just take this moment to pause and allow for some engagement.
You want us to just go?
Sure.
It's like being an on-demand test.
Yeah. You don't have to stand up.
I think one of the concerns that's been coming around quite a bit is the reliance on iReady data. And I think as someone who's been in multiple meetings about iReady before we adopted it, it's not a tool that is usually meant for just assessment. It's meant to be like a whole package deal. And that means that the students who are using it are used to the way it works. Whereas watching kids try to take it, and it requires you failing a lot. And it's really, really, really hard, and it's heartbreaking to watch the kids take it. And I know for many of my former RSP students, it wasn't accurate data because of the emotional component. And I know for many other students, it's like, well, just you gotta get through it because we have to do it. So we gotta go through it, but it's not, it's really hard for them. And I think because it's meant to be a package deal, the people who do it, use the intervention tool and use it as the whole package, get to understand the program a lot better, so it's less of a burden emotionally on them than it is on the kids who literally just have to take the test and sit there and fail and then fail and fail again, because that's how it's set up. And I know that that's a concern that's district-wide, comes up a lot.
I have the presentation on my phone, so I'm just looking at it, so I don't have to say where to go. I know on goal 1 with the recruiting and retaining of staff, something that we brought up when we had our stakeholder meeting with Will, is that there needs to be, I know we're not getting into the nuts and bolts of the LCAP, but some sort of metric on why teachers are leaving or how long they are here before they leave. That we think would be something is interesting to look at. This little handout that was outside is really useful because it has the money that's attached to everything. And I know that's something that whenever we have our meetings with Will, we can't really grasp our heads around what's the best thing because we don't know if it's a $0 item or a $150,000 item. And just quickly looking through it and tallying it up, there's $388,000 worth of PD projected for next year. And it's just overwhelming to think when all that PD is gonna happen. I mean, I guess the district has plans, because this is in 1 year all that PD will happen? Or is this multiple years?
No, yeah, it's multiple years.
Oh, okay. Because I just saw 22, 23.
Yeah, it's a 3-year plan, but it's some of those actions, some of those PDs that were in there for 21, 22 did not happen because of lack of substitutes or the times that we had scheduled it and for various different reasons. But so some of them are 3-year plans. Some of the professional development that was planned for the 21, 22 year, we are no longer going to do. We're just no longer going to do that because of the input that was provided through the partnerships, and also because of the data analysis that was done from various different data sources. That it was just not. It wasn't a good idea to continue with that action.
So did some of this PD already happen?
Some of this PD is in lieu of happening. It's still happening.
Yeah.
Like it's, some schools have had it, some schools haven't had it, that kind of deal, or some groups have had it and some.
In process.
Yeah, in process. Thank you. Process.
And then just something that we, seeing the money too, because we can always guesstimate, and we know Sunset Ridge has a different pile of funds or a different money allocated to them. To see $371,000 of staffing allotted to them when we're always trying to make sure all of our resources are shared equitably. I wonder if some of this other money could help support other schools. And I think I don't know if we're gonna get another chance to talk, so I'll say this too. Hopefully moving forward, our LCAPs go back to having our group meetings, because we had our meeting with Will, and what we say is our teacher and our CSEA version. But I'd love to hear the parent version or the administrator version and have that conversation and be able to tell parents why we think one way, and also to hear from parents why they think another way. So hopefully, moving forward, we can get back to having those stakeholder meetings and sharing that input. I know it's hard having meetings, but it's important, I think, and helpful.
Well, and some of that would decrease the meetings, because then you're meeting with everyone all at once, instead of multiple meetings.
I'm sure I'll remember things afterwards.
So this sort of brings up a question for me.
Uh-huh.
So I guess what's a little unclear is if some of these are spread out over 3 years as opposed to other, you know, items. Like, it would be nice if that was indicated to us.
Yeah.
Because you know, it's hard to make a decision, or, you know, to think about it if we're, you know, $10,000 expense each year is different than a $3,800 or $30,000 expense every year. So it'd be nice to have some sort of indicator on there, you know, maybe just 8 years. Anyway.
So you will have more time as a board to discuss this, and we're happy to talk about that. I think if you're okay with it, we'll go on to the next piece. I think one of the challenges around an LCAP is, and you know, I was part of the very first LCAP where it was like, here's the plan, and let's put together the plan. Planning and accountability are like two sides of a challenge, and so you can make it an accountability device, or you can make it a plan and communication device. I will tell you, the state is moving more toward the accountability part of that, which makes it really, really hard to read. So then what you do is you try to take the parts out of the LCAP and simplify them, and then that's where people say, well, I don't have enough information on how this all goes. So we're happy to elaborate on this. Well, you know, I will say in general, this is the work our district has been doing last year. It's the work that we've been doing this year. It's the work that we're going to do next year. And so I'd be really careful about going in and saying, we approve this and we don't approve this. This is the whole package. And you provide direction on the work that we're doing. And that's my job, is to try to implement those parts of that. And we as a district do that. We've worked really hard through the pandemic to listen to what people are saying to us. And we've taken in a great deal of stakeholder piece. And some of it is the formal channels, but some of it is the every Tuesday morning or afternoon, I'm meeting with staff. You know, there are recurring themes that come up around this. And so that's why we're here today, is to talk about this. But this is just your first introduction to this. We can answer any of the questions on that. So happy to do that.
So, Superintendent Bolton, just a question of procedure then, so that I understand. So I understand that this LCAP represents all of the work that you just described of the staff and the stakeholder communities and what have you with this. As we look at it today, what is the timeline after this and the dependencies that exist? Obviously, this is tied to funding and budget and what have you, so I'd love to kind of understand where we are in that timeline. So if there were changes, are we pushing, you know, how does that impact everything else?
So it's May 11th. On June 1st is where we have the public hearing, and that's really the public's time to get up and say, you have this, this, and this, and we need to have this and this. And so adjustments can be made at that point. That's really the formal way. Lots of districts don't do this part of it. They don't do the part where we are making the sausage, right? But if you think about how much work has come up to this point, is that we have to be mindful of the work that took us to get here, and then think about, like, is this, you know, a minor issue or is this a major issue? I think we want to be fixing the major issues. Those are the ones that we really need to make. It is as a person who has written an LCAP, it is an incredible challenge to get it all in and get it all accounted for and get it all quantified, really. That's kind of the piece that goes along with that. And when you do see big numbers, they are almost typically always tied to a salary. That's why they're, you know, sometimes, I'll just stop right there in terms of, like, that's where big spending is. So there's still time for change on this. And like I said, many districts don't have this piece of that. And our purpose for doing this is to introduce the LCAP and help communicate it to you all and give you a chance to discuss the highest priorities, as well as introduce it to the public.
We do have, if I can add something else, we do have a part of the process is that we do need to submit it to, we we do need to submit it to the San Mateo County Office of Ed. There's a LCAP team at the San Mateo Office of Ed that reviews all of the LCAPs. Most of the things they're looking through is compliance. They're not trying to make decisions for the districts, but they're looking for the compliance piece. And that sometimes is, you're converging need, converging compliance, and then converging funding in one document. So a lot of times, we have, like after here, 10 days before public hearing, you have to submit it to San Mateo County, 10 business days. So that's Tuesday, that's next Tuesday. So there may be some changes that made, but then when we submit it, we could still make more changes, but we also have to take into account what San Mateo County feedback comes back to us and tells us what, oh, this is not, compliant, or you're not spending enough of percentage of funding for unduplicated pupils or whatever it might be. We've been pretty good over the years about not getting too much off compliant, but it's still, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that part, that's still a piece that has to be considered before it goes to public hearing.
And then it must be approved by June 30th. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about that one. So that's our interest. And then as you go through, you have to realize it's a living, breathing, changing document. Is that changes can be made as, there were a number of things that we didn't get accomplished this year for all the reasons that we all know. And so we either decide whether to move those forward or whether to not do them if they no longer seem applicable. Seems good. Okay, Josie, you want to move on to the budget?
Okay, thank you. So we want to give you an overview of the budget. You can go ahead and move on, Will. This is really preliminary. The governor's main revision will be released on Friday, is what I'm hearing, and in the afternoon we should hear some of the actual figures in his main revision. So tonight I'll just give you a preliminary of the overview of what's included in the budget that we have presented tonight. So local control funding formula, the cost of living, is right now at 6.56%. I am hearing higher numbers that are coming out of, that will come out in the main revision. Pacifica is currently an LCFF funded district, and I'll talk a little bit about more on the next slide. Our projection of average daily attendance right now is 2,695 students, which is quite a bit lower than what we have had in previous years. Last year and this year, the governor had a hold harmless clause, so we were able to use the 1920 ADA, which was about 300 students higher, a substantial amount more funding for our district. And we've been faced with 2002, 2023, the loss of that hold harmless. So I'm hearing in the May revision there is strong support for letting districts either use a 3-year averaging of their ADA or possibly another figure. So we'll know more on Friday, but that is something that we're hoping that comes to fruition. Supplemental funding is about 22.5%. It is a decrease from prior years. And that's because the unduplicated students are mostly identified through the free and reduced application process. And during COVID, these last couple of years, all of the school meals have been free for all students, and so there really was no need for them to fill out the free and reduced applications. It is something that our district will need to work on as far as identifying those students so that we can maintain our supplemental funding. It is a substantial portion of our budget. Deferred maintenance, right now I haven't seen anything formal in the budget for deferred maintenance, but that would be one area, if it's included in the May revision, would be a big impact for school districts. As you know, our school district has been struggling with deferred maintenance funding. And you can go ahead and go on. So state funding, LCFF funding versus community funding, that's something that we've talked a lot about. LCFF funding is really when the amount of students that you receive is multiplied by a factor, and that is how they come up with your LCFF funding, and I'll show you the buckets on the next page. Community funding is when the property taxes that a school district receives exceed the LCFF funding formula. And as you know, you've heard San Mateo County is very unique in California. Districts have been flipping between LCFF funding and community funding because the property tax distributions have fluctuated. And what happens in San Mateo County is what happens to some districts flipping between basic aid and community funding affects other districts. So Pacifica School District flipped to community funded in November 2021. We presented you with the first interim report. And because we flipped into a community funded position, we had $1.4 million higher funding. And that was due to higher supplemental property taxes. And in short, what happened was 3 San Mateo County school districts had flipped in the prior year. And the way supplemental taxes works is when districts flip, they do not receive their supplemental taxes the following year. So those 3 school districts were not receiving supplemental taxes in this current school year, which pushed Pacifica School District into a basic aid status. Then in April, we were notified by the San Mateo County that the supplemental taxes were lower than they had initially calculated, and so Pacifica School District then flipped back into an LCFF funded status. If you maybe just go to the next slide, Will, because I think this picture really demonstrates how how the districts are different in community funded versus LCFF funded. So the first bucket with the green is an LCFF funded district. They used to call it state aid. So the formula of how many students you have times the state factor shows you the total. And then the first bucket the district receives, the blue, is the amount of property taxes that a district would receive. So the green is where the state makes up the difference. So the school district receives their full allocation of funding. In the second bucket, it's you can see that it's all blue because in that situation, a school district is receiving more property taxes than what the state funding allocation comes up with. And so they get to keep the excess property taxes. And that's where you can see the blue spilling over into the bucket. And that's where Pacifica was at first interim, there was $1.4 million more in supplemental taxes. And then now we're hearing that that's not the case. So now we're back in the first situation where our bucket is being filled with state aid. And so we're reliant on the state paying us for our funding per student. So I'll continue and then we'll talk questions after. Is that the process? Talking about Pacifica's funding, there are 3 ways that Pacifica School District is funded. You hear a lot about federal funding when you hear them talk about the federal budget. Just in relation, Pacifica really does not receive that much in federal funding. The categories we receive federal funding are Title I, which is for the low socioeconomically disadvantaged students, is really $96,000. Title II is for professional development. And Title III is for your English learners, and those amounts are very small as well. And then IDEA is the special education individuals with disabilities, is just under $600,000. So in total, Pacifica receives $772,000 of federal funds annually. And then you move into the second category, which is state funding. There is, that's the local control funding formula, and there's the base grant of how much every student generates based on their grade level and their class size, and Pacifica receives $25.1 million. And then what we call supplemental funds is the students that are identified as unduplicated. Those are your low income or English learners or foster youth, and that generates 20% more in revenue, and for Pacifica it's $1.1 million. And those are the funds that are generated based on your unduplicated, and that's the area where we are just hovering above 20% right now. So we need to focus next year on identifying those students. And then concentration funds is when you receive 50% more, having a higher unduplicated student count. We are not in that category because we only receive about 20% unduplicated. And then the local category is your parcel tax and your bond measure. Both of those measures were passed by Pacifica taxpayers and are restricted to the ballot languages. And so the parcel tax has $1.3 million, and the bond is $55 million, which we have presented to you recently a lot of the facilities master plan and how those funds are being spent. So going forward with budget assumptions, kind of just an overview of some of the big expense categories of the budget. Pensions are one of the big expense categories when you look at employee costs. The district, CalSTRS is for certificated staff and CalPERS is for classified staff. So all of our staff do have a pension, and the district contributes a portion to that pension, and the employee contributes a portion to that pension out of their paychecks as well. So CalSTRS is 19.1% of an employee's salary, and last year the state absorbed that cost. This year we are going to see that increase of about $25,000. CalPERS, the district contributes 25.37% of an employee's salary into that pension account, and that was an increase of 2.3%, which is just under $100,000. It's $94,000. Some other budget assumptions that we use as we're building the budget and multi-year is employee step and column. There's a salary schedule for all of our employees, and there's steps where people move on the salary schedule each year. And then column is for teachers with credentials. They move across the salary schedule based on how many units they have with the universities. And so annually for certificated, it's about $181,000, and classified is $68,000. Now that is offset by attrition. And right now we haven't really had a lot of attrition, but in past years those numbers are offset when employees leave the district and there are new hires. Health benefits has projected to increase 5%, which is just over $100,000. We really won't be able to build the actual increase into our budget until CalPERS adopts their rates in June. Vision and dental, there hasn't really been any increase the last couple of years due to low usage, probably because of COVID. And then one of the areas we've had an increase in San Mateo County, and particularly in Pacifica, is our property insurance, because of when we have incidences on our facilities. And that's a substantial increase this year of just under 24% for $82,000. And then workers' comp, actually there was a decrease. We had budgeted a large amount for workers' comp this current fiscal year, which then this final state budget had absorbed that. And so going forward, there's a decrease of $86,000. And then operations, this is one area where we did have a substantial increase this year that we weren't exactly anticipating. In the current fiscal year, there was about a $50,000 increase. And that was because of the utilities, the gas, because of COVID. All the doors and windows were open, and all of the HVAC was running the entire time. So we had a large increase, and of course, Pacifica, the garbage rates and other rates have also increased. So next year, we're projecting an additional 5% increase of $33,000. So going forward, just kind of an overview of some of the other areas where the district's LCFF funds are contributed. There is a 3% required contribution to restricted routine maintenance account. And also, special education is severely underfunded, both at the federal and state level. So the district does contribute funds to special education. Those contributions together are almost $5.8 million. And then this year, we have had to transfer additional funds to deferred maintenance of $100,000. And so hopefully if there's some funding in the state budget package, that would help offset some of those transfers. So we've talked a lot about the uncertainties right now. We are waiting until Friday for the governor's May revision. One of the things to keep in mind is the final state budget doesn't pass until June. And there have been years where the final state budget is different than the May revision. So that is one area that we have to be aware of. We will adopt our budget based on the governor's May revision, and if there are any substantial changes, we'll immediately make budget revisions in August. Otherwise, we would make the changes at first interim in November. Right now, we're LCFF funded. We are looking very closely at our enrollment and our attendance for next year. We're looking at our staffing, which is sometimes it's difficult in some areas to budget for staffing because we don't know exactly how many students we have at the moment. And then we have to look at the contributions to programs for both special education and deferred maintenance. Going forward is really a snapshot of our current estimated actuals for this year.
where we believe we'll end up this year, and then the projected budget for 2022 and 2023 and 2023-24. So really, it's just a big overview, the beginning balance, our revenues, and our ending fund balance. This is the total general fund, so it does include all of the restricted programs. We will update this as soon as we have the figures from the May revision. And then going forward again, just components of ending fund balance. What is the ending fund balance comprised of? There is a small revolving cash account, legally restricted balances. When you saw the ending fund balance on the prior page, what's legally restricted are those, what they used to call categorical funds. So there's the educator effectiveness grant that we received this year that we haven't spent, so it's sitting in the ending fund balance. There's some expanded learning opportunity funds and some ESSER funds. So all of those funds, when you hear Will do his presentations on plans, are all restricted funds. And they're all sitting in the legally restricted account. And then we do have to account for the 3% reserve for economic uncertainty. And then when we have unassigned general fund, it's what's left over after we have accounted for those restricted and reserved funds. So what are the next steps? Again, we're waiting for Friday for the state's, the governor's May revision, and then the final budget in June. As Dr. Olson mentioned, we're going to have a public hearing on June 1st, where the public will have an opportunity to review the LCAP and the budget and make comments and questions. We will adopt our budget on June 15th, prior to the state finalizing their budget. And then we will continue working on finalizing staffing and enrollment. We bring that to you in the fall, along with our first interim report in November. So that's a very, very quick overview of the budget. I'm happy to, I guess this is the time for input now. Thank you. So this is an opportunity for engagement. Any questions? Questions, comments? All right, let's go on to board discussion. Go ahead, Nina.
So just a quick clarifying question, and I apologize if this is a very rudimentary question, but so the budget overall is for the year for 22-23 is somewhere between 30 to 35 million or so, right? What's listed here is like 2.2 million in funding. Can you help me understand how that interacts?
Can you bring that up, Will, so we can look at it? Are you looking at the multi-year summary? So I think she's looking at the, why don't you look at the
So I'm just
multi-year?
thinking, the question is like a very high level question of our annual budget for
Yes.
this school district is somewhere in the 30-something
Yes.
million. And then the funding that was put across LCAP was about 2 million.
Oh,
And so I'm
okay.
just wondering, why is
Yes.
it 2 million versus 5 million
Okay.
versus whatever?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we're going to work on, and Will can add on too. Not everything in the budget is included in the LCAP. We have normal operations
Yeah.
that are not included in the budget. For example, the utilities and the staffing, it's not all included in the budget. And I think there's a section where we will actually list that. We didn't fill out that section yet because we don't have the numbers. Did you want to add?
Well, yeah, it used to be a requirement when you're writing the LCAP, and this came from the state, was that you had to almost basically include every single penny that you spend. But they've gone back from that because people were saying, they were listing literally everything that's spent money on, and it was so hard to quantify in one plan. So it's not a requirement that you have to list everything, but there is a budget overview for parents, which is something we're still working on because we don't have the final numbers. But once we have that, then there's an explanation within that, a narrative that says this does not include custodial staff salaries. This doesn't include many of the staff salary. This is more of just those actions, any cost that those particular actions have against that amount.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I guess what's conceptually difficult for me to understand is this represents less than 8% of the budget, and yet it's we're outlining the priorities of the school district. I totally understand that staffing, just like normal staffing, is probably 90% of the budget or something like that. So I appreciate that, but I guess that's where my head was like, how is this the priority if the majority of money is, allocated in different ways?
That's actually a great question, and when I first was the superintendent, it was, you try to account for every single penny, and it just really truly became too cumbersome and very much became an accountability document, so, but I think we could probably mention in here where the other 80% is.
90%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was made harder that you're waiting for a May revision to tell you how much you actually have, and so it was hard to, you were literally, the last few years, it was literally when they had that, it was literally the last few days of having to turn it in, you were like throwing all these actions in, like,
No,
we
I
have
appreciate
20
that.
custodians,
Yeah.
and we have,
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think when I think about this as a community document to look at, like what I did was I looked at the 3 goals and I looked at the percentage of funds allocated to those 3 goals. And I was like, oh, goal 3 has 44% of the funds. But that's not really fair for me to do, right? Because I'm only looking at 8% of the budget. I'm not looking at the entirety of it. So in fact, the majority of the district's budget might be towards goal 2, even though it doesn't look that way. So I think that's somehow communicating that, I think, would be helpful, because otherwise you're doing math on a very small amount of money versus what the district actually invests.
Good question.
Well, just to piggyback on that, I mean, do we actually know how much staffing is built into this? If you guys look through it, can you tell me there's,
The staffing would
There's a
be.
summary.
but that's, I see personnel amount, but like, is that 3 people? Is that 5 people?
oh, that's in this particular,
Uh-huh.
that's in this document?
Right.
It's really connected to the actions and what the goals state, so it may be extra hours if it's professional development, so we would calculate the amount of extra hours a teacher or staff member would need to have that professional development, or it might be a specific position that's specifically connected to an action on there, so that would be the entire salary or the entire compensation that that one position would entail. So it's not like every teacher in the classroom is represented in there when they're talking about a new phonics program. It's not the actual cost of the teacher
That's
teaching.
maybe an hour each teacher.
Yeah, it's how much PD they have, how much the phonics program costs, or what to develop that would be, that's just an example, but so it's not literally the teacher teaching it.
It's not a one-to-one thing.
Yeah.
There are a handful of
Oh, I
things
saw
that
the
stand out.
VPs are in there, and
What's that?
I see the Sunset Ridge jobs
Yeah.
are in there. and-
Yeah.
Speaking of Sunset Ridge, just want to clarify that they have the largest number of English learners, foster youth, and low income. That's why the money is being allocated there.
Yeah.
Okay, want to be clear.
Yes, and they also have the students that are the most impacted by the pandemic. Both of those are true.
Okay.
Is that the recovery for some of the students affected by the pandemic is slower than is happening at other schools.
So that's why the funding is being, focused there. I just want to make sure that's what the reason is, because they need it more.
Correct. And did we answer your question?
Well, somewhat, yes. I mean, I think we can't just quickly pull that number out, I guess, is what I'm gathering, because it's too
So-
broken up.
This document right here, this kind of infographic item is something that we were able to pull out of document tracking system. And so yesterday, when we posted the agenda at 5:30, this got finished at 4:30. This got finished at 4:30, which resulted in a direct, the information came from that to this. So we're not very fast in this as well. We can improve in terms of being able to summarize the things, just because we work to get it finished as opposed to being able to summarize that.
And kind of to keep piggybacking on myself with that point, that I guess I'm trying to kind of understand it. So am I to understand that like what's changing is about 10% of our budget? Like what we're doing differently or reallocating in a different way? Would that be a fair statement or would that not be a fair statement?
I don't think I would say that. I think what I would say is there are really actually a handful of items that we either didn't finish or that came directly out of the partner engagement that we realized that we need to do. And so some of it is work that was in there that we didn't complete, but the other, I'm trying to think about an example of something that came out of the stakeholder, the partner engagement.
So the 21, when we turned in the 3-year plan, a lot of it was around recovery. We knew that students were coming back, staff were coming back, we were going to go back to in-person. We didn't know what the impact really totally was, so that's why we had the comprehensive assessment system. We had the teachers collaborating and working off of that. We also had the caring school community implementation. The counselors were getting data about the amount of counseling sessions, those type of things, so the mental health and the support that. So there was a lot of gathering of information, and then based off that, we had actions that we had anticipated. These are actions that are probably going to need to happen just for us to recover and come safely back to school, back to in person. But then as we collected the data and as we heard from our educational partners, we discovered, we have to make some adjustments and changes to these actions that are already in the LCAP. So, for instance, the goal 2, there were 3 or 4 additional actions that were put in there that weren't in there the last year. And then there was a few actions that were ended. And I'll bring up the example, the accelerated learning, professional development. Right now, moving forward, it doesn't seem we need a need in that because we've identified we are in the process. We have identified and we're continuing to identify where our students are at and what actions need to impact them directly. And accelerated learning is not really one of them. It's not really a high priority. So that's how we kind of massage the existing LCAP. It was really kind of being written by educational partner input, data analysis, feedback that was coming in, and we were just kind of, okay, we got to make these adjustments to this because we assumed some things that didn't come to fruition, and other things we needed to continue. Like for instance, the counselors and the mental health service, and we was like, oh my gosh, this was a big need, and it's still a big need. We need to continue it. Where we'd gone into it thinking maybe this was a 1-year thing during the recovery. So those are just a few examples, but I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where I'm going with it.
So I understand that what I said is not a fair characterization, that a lot of things are actually moving around. This just highlights some of the key things that have been planned for, I think is what I'm.
Yeah. The exciting part of it is that, and I've heard from a lot of teachers and staff members about this. They feel like in many ways they know their students better, and because of the collaboration, because of the piece of that piece, but in knowing them better, it's really kind of changed the way they're thinking about how they need to approach these issues. So that's where the challenge is.
Let me ask you this about just either the presentation or the goals and actions that you've seen. Is there anything in here that surprises you? Or that is new to you for this first time?
I think, I'm not surprised, but since this is my first time full run, beginning LCAP, the whole thing, I'm genuinely curious how we're going to make our goals, and I really want our students to get the best education and the best support that they can get. So for me, it's about, are we doing the best we can? Because I know we've been hit with a pandemic. I know everything's kind of crazy. I know we have some new goals around equity. And, I remember when I first started, and seeing how, even this was before the pandemic, seeing how our most at-risk youth were really struggling. I don't want to sit on this board and see the same results 2 years later or 3 years later. So I'm hoping that we are creating goals that are going to make an impactful difference, even more so than what we had before. And I know it's complicated by, a year out of school, it's more, for me, it's like, are we going to do the best that we can that's going to give our students the resources that they need so that they can get the best education? So that's pretty much where I'm at. It's not I don't know what to do, but I don't want to miss the mark. So I'm hoping that this is going to get us where we want to go with our students. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was actually talking with the principal today, and she was talking about how she has goals within the SIPSA, and they're aligned to goals that we have within the LCAP, that what she thought was an action that would help get there has changed. It was more now, I have all these supports that I can put in place, but I gotta get the student to school.
Right.
I have a lot less students coming to school than I had pre-pandemic, right? The absenteeism is, so she's almost had to kind of shift and change, so it's, I'm not saying it's a moving target, I don't want to say that, but the goal is still there, but it's kind of, we're having to adjust in the way we get to it. So I totally see what you're saying there. I think that's the constant challenge.
What you said earlier about the iReady testing, I don't want our children panicking over testing that's supposed to help us support them, because that kind of defeats the goal. They're upset to come to school because they can't pass the test. These things concern me. Like, we need the tools. We need to be able to assess them so we know what to provide, but are the tools getting us the information that we need without harming the students in the process? It's very complicated. So my mind is, I hope this plan does what it needs to do. And I hope we have what we need to get our students to where they need to be. So it's more of an observation. Like, I'm not sure whether the plan is the right plan, but I'm hoping that we have enough information to provide what our students need.
I think that's exactly it, is figuring out what the students need and being able to respond, and it may be slightly different at each school.
Yeah.
I will tell you, in California, that's an incredible challenge. California schools are underfunded to a degree that when we think about special ed, English learners, all of the challenges that we have in our classrooms, there's not enough money to meet the needs at the same level.
Yes.
But I think if we do look at data and look at the way to respond based on that and to respond instructionally, if we really go back to that tiered level of support, we're really hoping that most students, hope is the wrong word, we are planning that 75% of our kids will get their needs met in general by the classroom teacher. That is going to require some adjustments in some of our classrooms in terms of how they include kids, or how they, sometimes there are some strategies that you can use. It's called universal design for learning. Some strategies to make the classroom instruction more inclusive. That is one of the things that we heard from our stakeholders, partners, in terms of from a number of special ed parents, is how do we make these classrooms more inclusive for all students? So that's something, none of this is a silver bullet. Some of it works, some of it doesn't work. You can't keep flip-flopping, because then if you think about anything that's really meaningful, takes great time to put into place. And we have to, do so with some integrity, so that it's not just, oh yeah, we tried that, or we tried that. So this is not easy. This is incredibly hard work. It's incredibly hard work after a pandemic, because the tricks that were in the bag before, we need those tricks and some extra tricks. And teaching is a team sport. It cannot be done by one individual. It has to be done by a school. It has to be done by a district. Like, we have to work together on this. And, it's can't be this fighting about, are we doing the right thing? It's like, let's try something. give it our best shot at it and look to make sure all of those pieces are in place. And then if it's not, then make the adjustment. Just, it's kind of like medicine. It's
Yeah.
that piece to, it's incredibly hard. Elizabeth?
Not really any questions, but the three-year plan, but every year we go back and we tweak it, and so you look 3 years out, but every year you're readjusting, so we can spend, if things are not working and so forth. That can be adjusted for.
Yep. And so at different times during the LCAP it used to be a rolling 3-year plan, and now it's at the end of next year, boom, and we start again, and we start with a brand new one. The forms will be different. They've already changed the forms just slightly on this. But if we look at it as like, okay, so we're now in year 2, really looking at year 3. It's important to look at, are the things that we're
You
doing.
can look back and see what was working and what was not,
Right.
importantly what was not working.
Yeah, exactly.
And you are allowed to go back in and readjust that.
Oh, absolutely.
And actually, we're presently in year 1, but this LCAP is for year 2.
Right,
So it's the adjustments made for year 2.
right. And then in year 3 is, it's having data, and it can be LCAP data, it can be, it can be Bridges data, it can be Fontes and Pinnell data, it can be iReady data, but are the strategies working? And so one example would be that we found out after the second iReady test that some of the students at Sunset Ridge were not making the same rate of growth as we were seeing at other schools. And so that's where we looked at putting the personalized instruction in place for both language arts and math throughout Sunset Ridge. I will be honest, I was a little skeptical on the personalized learning for all students. I don't, coming back from a pandemic, my theory of action was that students really needed teacher instruction with human beings. And so I was a little bit skeptical on that, but they are using it now, and it's actually giving them both things, is that the students are getting the personalized learning piece, and it's also allowing the classroom teacher to pull small groups. So it's kind of a 2-for piece. If we felt like that had a high value and that would be something that all students would benefit from, that is something that you could do. It's not a huge expense. It's maybe $80,000, $100,000. If that's something that would be of high value to that. The iReady and the personalized learning, you don't have to have both of those. But we're giving it a shot at Sunset Ridge.
A couple things. So, first, attendance. So could you remind me approximately how much per student we get?
It's about 10,500 in that range.
Okay, so essentially, next year, we're gonna be held accountable, or we're gonna lose all the money for the 300 students?
Yes, well,
Or there's gonna be that potential drop off unless something changes?
it looks like they might adopt the 3-year average. So we
Okay,
could take an average of 1920, 2021, and 21-22 is hopefully what will pass on Friday.
Okay.
Something like that.
all right, well,
But you're right, potentially there's a large drop.
So throughout California, for the very first time in the last 20 years, they're below 6 million students, which indicates this is an issue. Our drop is really relatively smaller than other school districts, so it's likely that there will be some amelioration in the budget.
Okay, well, that's good news. I kind of wanted to just talk a little bit about the screen team versus the solo team.
Yep.
And what's the difference between the two teams? Because it seems like they should probably pretty much be the same.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious about that first.
So the screen team, first of all, I don't know that every school uses that name. I know that Sunset Ridge uses that name, screen team. It's essentially a pre-referral team.
Oh.
And they're looking at students being presented to them with concerns, academic concerns, behavioral concerns, social emotional concerns, and different school sites do it in different ways. But that is that kind of pre-student study team mechanism, and it's one of the ways actually when I was talking about the counseling services, that we were able to kind of piggyback on those teams to figure out, you know, which students needed what as far as those services. And the screen team generally will have SO team members. SO team is essentially like the school counselor and the school psychologist at the school.
Right.
We also have like our therapists, our lead mental health, you know, our BCBA, like myself, like we have sort of district, you know, district guidance for the SO teams. So we meet like at a district level with the SO teams that are out of the schools, so school counselors, school psychologists, and then screen teams are very much that kind of pre-referral.
Yeah, it just seems like we should now have the kids identified by sort of the same group that's kind of watching them all the way through the process.
It pretty much is
Sort
that
of
way.
sounds like that's.
We do
okay.
have a lot of names of these different teams and these different groups, but you know, essentially the screen team will have the SO team on it.
Right.
Yeah.
So now, I mean, so this is also, the SO team is gonna probably also have the potential contractors for special ed also in that? Or are these generally people that identify?
It could,
Okay.
yeah.
Because for me, it'd be great to identify at every school, a group that we feel is solid and is going to be there for maybe a succession of years.
Yeah.
So that we're not having to relearn or have staff reteach about a particular student as time goes on. And I know we can't know exactly who's going to stay or not, but I think that because, you know, we all hear a lot of feedback around these kids kind of getting lost.
Yeah. So
anyway, I just something to think
stability.
about, right,
Stability
making sure that's like
great.
stable.
Documentation is a huge piece of that, is like having a structure where that information comes, and so a schedule, that piece, but then documentation of those meetings and connected to students so that you can say, oh, I have the student now in second grade, oh, look, in first grade, there was a meeting about the attendance there, so that we can see all of those pieces that are on there.
Yeah, and it also has the different interventions that have been employed, successful, not successful,
Right.
the tweaking of it, so.
Well, and that's very important.
Yeah.
I guess then also kind of in that same genre is 3.9 is, you know, it's kind of a big total there. It's the social, emotional, and mental health intervention support. So I guess a question about that is how are we monitoring success there? From year to year, because it's a big number.
Yeah, it is.
And I do think, you know, it's very important that we get everybody back in the mental place for being in school. But I want to make sure that it's being
And this
used in a good
is
way.
kind of what I was referring to as far as let's look at the data. Like it's looking at kind of a combination of things. It's looking at our survey data to see how students are actually feeling, how families are feeling about school. It's you know, really looking at how many students we're serving. I actually had some updated numbers. We've had 2,476 counseling sessions this school year. It's almost mind-boggling. It's like, it's amazing. I mean, we are seeing lots and lots of students. So how many students are we seeing? How successful are they being in the sessions? Are we terminating those sessions? Meaning, you know, they've made that progress.
Right.
You know, and I think it's again, as Dr. Olson was saying, tied to salaries. So when school counselor salaries are probably involved there.
Yeah.
And what we didn't necessarily set out to say the school counselors are going to do all of this, but it's morphing into the school counselors being so important for direct student services, for that kind of climate piece, that positive school climate piece, that's that slower movement, and being parts of these various teams. So kind of wearing that school counselor hat, screen team, student study team. So they are just essential. Plus, they also do kind of assistant principal like things for whatever the school. I'm looking over at Monica for Valmar, but like what there are things that are particular for school sites. The school counselors are assisting principals with various pieces there, along with all of those other things.
But I will tell you probably the most important role that they play right now is the mental health crisis, is that when there needs to be a risk assessment done, it is very helpful to have one at each site. And there have been a very large,
We've done 37 suicide risk assessments this school year. I gave you these numbers at another presentation, but they've increased. And the 5 level 1 threat assessments. So absolutely. And to be able to respond with the person at the school site and also in a timely way. I mean, when we're finding out about these really serious concerns, we're able to respond sometimes within the hour and have that student pulled in the office, safe, talking with the right people. So,
just out of curiosity, how are the school counselors allowed to recommend counseling outside of the school district, like through their medical or through their own private doctors? Because I'm just wondering, summer's coming, so that's no school counselor. Are these students who are coming to these sessions actually continuing with their, mental health?
I mean, we would, for kind of the school-based, sessions, as long as we continue to see the need, we would continue to provide those services. I understand what you're saying about the summer coming.
Yeah.
I don't think that our school counselors per se are, making these referrals or making these recommendations. When they feel that somebody might need more, what they'll do is refer to Christina Ireson, our mental health lead, consult with her. Okay. She would probably be the one to kind of connect. She's a marriage family therapist, so she would be the one to connect with the family and kind of discuss about these next steps. We do have Care Solace, of course, so we can make, which is our concierge service, we can make, give families that, that information so they can try to access supports.
Yeah.
But we're not like.
No, I just, I'm wondering, I'm like, it's summer coming and, if the student needs counseling, I don't want that to just disappear for 2 months and, something could happen. Because it's been a very hard year for a lot of students. That's probably why we started this program and, we have so many students using it. So I just want to make sure they're supported.
Yeah, I think on those highest level cases that communication does happen. We do not just want to pull the rug out because school's out. So we want to make sure that students continue to get what they need over the summer, that they're safe.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. I just want to say one more thing, and I know it's already mentioned in here, but is that we really need to figure out a way to get counselors to come here and stay here. And I don't, there's probably negotiation things involved in that, but it's just really good for the kids if they see the same face year after year instead of having a new face year after year.
Yeah.
And then also the staff that are there that have to maybe retrain. So I know that people are working on that, but I just want to reiterate, I think it's really important for the kids, especially in all the delicate states they're in right now, that there's consistency from year to year. That's really important.
So I will say to you, I'm not when we hired the counselors, we knew that it was important that we get that right away. And we knew that we'd have money for 1 year to do that. It became very clear early on that that was such a high value across the board based on what we were hearing from teachers and principals and parents. That's a high value. So quickly we used COVID relief money to do year 2. Year 3, 4, and 5, we have to look for that money. How do we use one-time money? How do we use additional state money? We hope that in the governor's budget that there's additional funding for counseling, but it's not an automatic. It's really a rare thing for a school district like us to have a counselor at every single school. We're grateful for it. We feel like it's been a huge part of our recovery plan, and it worked out even better than I had imagined. When we first said that, I'm like, we're not gonna be able to fill all those positions. And so then when we were able to fill them, and we were able to fill them with such high-quality counselors, like that was a huge win. So the next piece is being able to carve that money out of the budget so that it's a consistent thing. And maybe it's, the parcel tax has funded the IBL counselor and the counselor for the K-8 schools. Maybe it's parcel tax, maybe it's some kind of federal recovery money, but that's not an automatic. That's kind of the challenge behind that.
To the question of, was anything of surprise, I think I was really happy to see the ELA and math intervention portion in goal number 2, 2.3. And the question that I have around that is, as I think about students coming back into a full year where it's not a transition year like this year was, to me the importance of really building that academic rigor back up where, this year the focus is really on making sure the students feel so mentally well to engage deeply in their academics. To me, next year is an opportunity to do more of that rigor and provide support for all students. And so I'm curious, I see here that it says targeted ELA and math intervention, which implies some students will get additional dosage of, high support. I'm curious if all students could benefit from that, and if that is something that could have, you would break students into student groups or however is appropriate based on, the staff's recommendations, but is kind of intervention time beneficial for all students in some way for ELA and math?
Well,
Or certain schools?
Well, in that, for that particular one, it talks about the intervention and support of those students that when needed, but the system that we have, the iReady system that we have, and I'm just talking about iReady now, not necessarily Bonds Pinnell and the other assessments tools that we use, or even the curriculum-based assessment pieces. But for the iReady one, that's the kind of the beauty of the program, is that it gives them a placement of where they're at, and then it allows them to have a program. Okay, this tells you that these students can work on this particular area. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're below grade level in that area or are far below grade level in it, but it does tell these are areas that they can work on even if they are at or above grade level. So that's the beauty of that diagnostic system, is that it just doesn't tell, okay, here are your students that are not doing well or struggling in these areas. It tells you, here's where all of your students are at, and then here are some next steps that you can do. Now, like I said, we had a limited number of licenses for students to use the personalized instruction, but the diagnostic does still tell, here's where your areas are in phonemic awareness, here's your areas of this area, and then it says, here's the next steps you can do with these groups of students that are at this level, no matter what level they're at, So that's kind of the beauty that's within it. But you were correct, is that particular action is that intervention piece and supporting those students that are far below grade level or are struggling in certain content strand areas.
Yeah, so I think what I heard you say, Will, is we're using our time differently for all students to make sure they're on the correct learning path that makes sense for them. Yeah. I think using time differently is one amazing strategy, which I see throughout this document, which is great. I guess the question that I have is, can or should we provide more time for all students to focus on these core subjects? So some of the growth goals that you have listed in this bigger document are aggressive and good, great that they're aggressive, and I hope we achieve these goals. But then I think, what are we doing differently during the school day to really get to those goals? And so I think about use time differently as one strategy, which includes, some of the paraprofessional support, the additional intervention. That's in the same time period we're going to provide some more support to students. But then there's also, can we just find more time for additional, support and time. And I often think about, when I was a math major, but I wasn't very good at math for a long time, and it just took me longer to get math than it did. I could still do the really hard problem sets, but it would just take me probably an hour or two longer than my peers. And so sometimes that time is really valuable to get the achievement that we're looking for.
Yeah. Now, yeah, you did mention, I think you also mentioned at a previous meeting about this idea of content-based professional development for teachers. So there is an action, I don't know which one it is, but there is an action in here that talks about this content-based professional development, and that's more about providing teachers some resources and some training around how they can do that first instruction for all of their students so that they're meeting those needs. I mean, you used to be referred to as differentiating your instruction, but that it's more of the focus on the content. So I do see what you're saying. You had mentioned before that that's a support and need that teachers need, because they're in a classroom that have these very areas and students are at various spots that being able to have some effective content-based instruction along with trainings is needed. And there is an action in there that pertains to that piece.
I think when we hear from school services around our special education study, I think and something we hear from teachers is they don't feel they have enough knowledge or support in terms of knowing how to work with all students in their class. So there probably will be, and the timing of all of these things are kind of hard because they all come out right now. But I think that's probably something that comes out of that. And then, Will, are we gonna do paper, the tutoring service for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade next year?
I just got the quote today, so
Okay.
I just gotta see if we have the money to pay for it. But yeah, I just literally got it.
Paper is an online program so that kids can use that after school in a learning center, or they can use it after school at home. Additional support targeted toward their projects.
Yeah, which I think is great. Explicitly, I guess I'm thinking is, does it make sense to take more time during the school day for all students to receive additional time to get back up or to
So
get
say
to
more
work?
about that. How do you think that would happen?
I don't know. I mean, I would look to the professionals to answer that question, but yeah, I mean, just you hear about some districts and schools implementing just school-wide intervention times. I don't know the details on how they structure it or what they do in that time. But I just think about just giving that extra time for students to get back into that rigor and that academics might support growth goals versus a targeted strategy. I think the targeted strategy is very much needed. My question is, should we expand that targeted strategy to everybody?
Yeah. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. I never really actually thought about it that way in that. I always thought there's teaching practices and then there's targeted instruction, right? So the teaching practices piece is really, I'm not saying it's on the teachers, but it's part of like making sure that you're getting every single minute of that school day is the best bang for that students, right? And so that's about practice. And then there's the targeted where you say, okay, we have, which I was really excited about this year, is the amount of collaboration amongst teachers back and forth, and it is spurred by the iReady and the training around that. But that collaboration about looking at that data and saying, okay, now I really am clear about what my students need, or the students that I'm serving need, and that target approach. But it's interesting. Thank you for bringing that up, because that makes me kind of think, okay, about time versus targeted.
Well, I think in all of this, when we have the data, it's around, so what? What are we going to do about it, right? And I think, I don't know that, district-wide right now, talking about school-wide intervention practices is the best bang for our buck. I think getting back to what's good first instruction and making sure all kids have access to that, that's one of the foundational blocks that you'll see in terms of, I think most kids will be well served in that way. And then when that's not working, then we could go to another aspect like that. But I feel like we, just having come back from the pandemic and going through a year where there have been multiple absences and multiple surges and other kinds of things, I'm not certain that going school-wide intervention is the right path. I think good first instruction is probably the best place to start. More?
Well, I did
So
really.
this is your
I did also really-
opportunity.
I like the STEAM goals and professional learning. I was surprised and happy to see that. It's obviously a personal and professional passion of mine. So. And, Josie, when you said that the supplemental funding, I think on the slide it said 22% and that was lower. Is that 22% of our total funds is supplemental?
No, that's actually our unduplicated number of students.
Oh, that's the unduplicated.
Yeah, so
number.
20% is the threshold to receive supplemental funding. And, we were at almost at 25% just a few years ago, and it's just slowly been declining.
That's the percentage of students.
Yes.
So that's about $100,000 less than we had last year.
Just out of curiosity, the decline in student enrollment in public schools, are they attributing that to homeschooling or to charter schools or?
They're not seeing an increase in charter schools, so they actually don't necessarily know where students are going.
Or is this just a decline in students in general? Like, is it less students now?
But it happened so quickly that it's a little bit shocking, is where did everyone go, is kind of, and I've heard different podcasts where some kids just disappeared and stopped with schooling. That's not typically our thing. I think ours moved out of the Bay Area, but Nidhi, what did you?
No, I completely agree. Like the Ed Week articles were like, where did the 1.7 million students go? Because it wasn't public charters, it wasn't private school enrollment. It's hard to think that all of that was homeschool, so, because even homeschool, you have to register, you can't just teach your kid at home.
Well, I had read that, they used to figure out enrollment, maybe they still do, I don't know, by the birth rates from the hospitals.
Yeah.
So I heard that there's been no really change in that, so I read that in connection to enrollment. They look back 5 years or think, whatever. I don't know how they do it, but they say that there was no correlation between the two. Like there wasn't like, oh, there's less birth rates,
So just as we were doing our facilities master plan, we did do a demographic study, and we actually thought it was going to go down just by about 100, but hold pretty steady. So we are surprised by this number. I think it's almost time, probably next year would be a good idea to do another one. Of the students that are of school age, how many of them are coming to school in Pacifica? How many know about the schools in Pacifica? Those numbers are going to matter ultimately. Maybe we'll get a little bit of a reprieve in terms of what Josie calls the cliff is like that, but ultimately, as long as we are funded by LCFF or by the state, every student matters. The other kind of thing that is on the political landscape is California is like one of 5 or 6 states that fund schools based on kids attending. And the issue is that we pay for the teacher regardless of whether the kid is there or not, right? So that provides a little bit of an extra challenge as well. So we may see a shift over the next few years into funding based on enrollment versus attendance. And we believe that attendance at school is important regardless, it's about learning. But, in the past, attendance at school was about funding. So It is an interesting thing.
It's weird that they've just disappeared. I'm very curious to know where the students
San
are.
Francisco Unified, 2,000 or 3,000
Yeah.
disappeared. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
I
our
mean,
200's a lot, but I mean, you think 2,000 or 3,000.
Yeah,
Just
I'm
vanished.
just curious, did the people move? You know, are they just not in school? It's very
It's a
strange.
nationwide decrease, like California felt it extremely,
Yeah,
but nationwide, you know, so it's not moving around states because then it would still be captured in the nation, right?
right, it's just,
Nationwide public enrollment.
So there wasn't really any states that you, I mean, I don't know, that you heard of that actually had increase? I mean, remember the Sacramento area, they were booming for a while? with
They
the-
still are in many places in Sacramento.
So I'm wondering if there's any states that are all of a sudden like Utah, I hear everyone's moving to Utah. Texas, yeah.
I had sort of just a kind of question about the district and policies with like ongoing bills. So you mentioned the insurance went up by 27,000, and I realize we had the flood and this kind of thing. I'm just wondering, like, how much can the school district negotiate? And like, because if it was my house and my bill went up by $27,000, I'd give them a call and talk it back down a little ways. And I see this kind of with these ongoing bills we have, you know, maybe even gophers or different things where it ticks up over time. But can we go back to them and say, hey, can we get a readjustment? Or is it once we voted, we just have to stick with what we voted on?
Well, we're part of the San Mateo County Schools Insurance Group, so we do have a pool.
Okay, so that's a little,
And some of it's based, there's a calculation, some of it's based on your experience. And we have had some experience these last few years. We've had more claims than I've seen in the past 2 years than we had over a 10-year period. You know, we had flood, we had a little water intrusion, we had a issue at Valley Mar, which is apparently
On the
not
fire.
covered by the insurance. We had the fire, we had some keying issue at IBL. We've had quite a few claims in the property area. Nationally, the rates have gone up because of the fires and all of the issues going on, but in San Mateo County, ours in particular went up more this year because of our claims.
okay, so I mean, I get that, like,
Yeah.
we're pooled over here. But, you know, there are other things on our budget that kind of come through every month that, you know, a company's just gonna tick it up as you move along. And I'm just wondering if it's, I mean, I know everybody's busy, but like, to go back to some of these companies and say, hey, can we look at these rates and make sure we're still getting the best deal? Or are we not allowed as a district to go back and renegotiate things once we've voted them in?
And that's really up to the San Mateo County Schools Insurance Group, SMIGSIG. That's their role, is to deal with the vendors and to do that type of thing, as far as.
Or the insurance?
For the insurance, yes.
But like, how about our individual, like, you know, I don't know, I mean, I mentioned gophers, you know, pest control,
yeah.
garbage even, sometimes we might be able to get, you
Are we
know, talk to
negotiating?
them, you know, are we able to ever go back and talk to them about some of the
For
rates?
some of those things like the pest control, we've switched vendors. We're currently switching gopher vendors. So those types of things, we can switch from year to year or month to month.
You mean we'll be able to buy our gophers
Yeah,
at a lower rate?
But you're talking
we're
about.
just hoping that you're
That's-
negotiating the best rate, you know, for the
Yeah.
district. So that, I think,
Yeah. you're
are you,
right.
I'm making sure I'm clarifying her question is, are you all, where you can negotiate with a particular vendor, are you negotiating for the lowest rate at the best price for us? Or is that something that is just too tedious to do?
No, that's what they're doing, actually. That's what George and Cece are doing.
Okay.
And we're constantly looking at the contracts for the operations supplies.
Mhm.
That's custodial supplies. So we also have what's called a CMAS, there's a California contract where you can get the preferable rates without negotiating. So, and we have a purchasing person in our department who she's always looking at the different websites to see what better rates. But for contracted services, they do requests for proposals, even if it's below the bid threshold for some plumbing projects and electrical. So they do shop around, and for regular services, they can switch, they can cancel contracts. Now, Recology is not something I don't think we can negotiate, or sewer fees, but, utilities. But the other ones, the service contracts, they can negotiate.
Okay.
I think one of the hugest challenges is, I think you've seen us scramble to get things even done, and when we think about the massive amount of work that different plans or things, is that you really need to think about the best value for the big ticket items, the things that are really, and when we think about strategically how we spend on those things, or not waste, right? One is like how we spend for the lowest, or that we don't waste when we have that opportunity. I'm not certain that we're right now in the best position to do that, just because of the scramble that's going on. I think after we catch up, we can probably be a little bit more strategic. If you have some ideas for, big ticket items where we could have big savings, we'll certainly.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's ringing a bell, but over the last 2 years, there's been things at different times. I've wondered why haven't we given a call, But, I'll keep an eye out and see if something jumps off the page again.
Yeah. We really want, how to most, it's important that, we use taxpayer money in the most efficient way possible to get the best value.
Especially since we have so little to work with.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think the district does a really great job just based on what we have, but sitting here changes your whole perspective about school funding and the impact that it has. And knowing, just dealing with things that have occurred since I've been here, just knowing how much our teachers love teaching our students and how much we want to support the teachers, and seeing the numbers, it's just very frustrating. But we do what we can to provide our students with the best education with this teeny tiny amount of money compared to other districts. So
I think that, just to broadcast what I expect will come out of the school services study, is that sometimes our super duper cheapness hurts us, and it ends up costing us. And so, there is likely to be recommendations around just the need for some more help to make sure that we're either better serving students or not wasting opportunities. And so,
I just hope that there are some people out there, parents, or, that go to the state and say, look, this is ridiculous. Schools need more money.
Edie?
Anything else? Are we done? Is everybody ready to wrap up?
7:18. So next steps would be the June 1st. Let me just tell you, we scrambled to get this done last night to be able to post with the agenda. The good news is that most of it is in place so that we can move forward with the two other parts of that. The work is important, so I appreciate your commitment to helping us do the best that we can in this meeting.
All right. Well, let's adjourn the meeting at 7:19 p.m.
Thank you.
everyone.
Oh,